first event of the semester. My name is Brian Evans. I teach geography here at HCC, and it's my pleasure to introduce Venezuela to all of you today. Following my talk, Professor Miller Waters is going to give a compelling talk about the book itself. Okay, so definitely stick around for that as well. All right, so Venezuela, our featured country today. How many of you feel you know a lot about Venezuela already? Any of you feel like it's a country you know very well already?
I am from Venezuela.
Okay, I guess you know it pretty well then, right? Okay. You can fact check me then throughout the day. All right, so really fascinating country, and I want to give you some of the cultural and physical and historical and economic background. Of course, some of the political context of what we're seeing these days as well today. Okay, so that is one of the main goals here. All right, now, if any of you have been to any of my talks before, you may know I like to ask a few questions along the way here. All right, a lot of these are true-false questions, but this first one is a fill in the blank. All right, so Angel Falls is outstanding due to what reason? It's the world's what waterfall? Tallest is, yeah? Does everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Yes, that is very good job. You got 1 for 1 as a group here.
Thank you, that's
Angel Falls is the world's tallest waterfalls. It has a 3,212-foot drop, right, which is almost like stacking 3 Empire State Buildings atop one another. Okay. So I always advise people not to go over those waterfalls in a canoe or something, because you won't live to tell about it probably if you try that. But very beautiful. If you're familiar with the movie Up, how many of you have ever seen that animated movie Up? Okay, if you've seen, I think it's called Inspiration Falls in that movie. That was inspired by Angel Falls. So if it looks a little familiar from that movie, this is the inspiration behind it. By the way, not every tourist who has gone to Venezuela before makes it to Angel Falls. That's because it's in a very remote part of Venezuela, okay, in the Guiana Highlands in the southeastern corner of the country. All right, so let's situate ourselves where Venezuela is. It's a relatively tropical country in terms of latitudes. It's situated just north of the equator, up to about 12 degrees north latitude. You have about 1,700 miles of coastline in Venezuela along the Caribbean and North Atlantic Ocean. The country shares borders with Brazil, Colombia, and Guyana. All right, and most of the country is comprised by this continental mainland. There are a number of islands, though, off the coast, the largest being Margarita Island. I'd like to show you a few videos throughout the course of the lecture today. Hopefully this will come up here. Yes, okay. And this first video kind of highlights one of the primary geographic challenges Venezuela faces currently. Keep in mind this video was produced in 2012, so if the timing seems a little off to you, that explains why. But the same geographic challenge discussed here is the geographic challenge that you can argue Venezuela faces today.
Located in South America, Venezuela is bordered by Colombia, the Caribbean Sea, Guyana, and Brazil. Colonized by the Spanish in the 16th century, Venezuela became an independent country in 1830. The northern portion of Venezuela is dominated by the eastern slope of the northern Andes. The mountains are cooler than the surrounding subtropical plains and host the majority of Venezuela's population. The country's core includes Lake Valencia and Caracas. Since the late 19th century, oil has been the driving force behind Venezuela's political and economic affairs. The first discoveries were made in the Maracaibo Basin. Later discoveries revealed heavy, sour crude deposits in the Orinoco Basin. The tropical Orinoco Basin is largely unpopulated, with little significant infrastructure. Just to the south are the Guiana Islands, which buffer Venezuela from the jungles of the Amazon River Basin. As a Caribbean country, Venezuela lies within the direct sphere of influence of the United States. The United States is not only the largest military power in the region, but also the largest consumer market and a key destination for Venezuelan crude oil exports. As a result, Venezuela's primary geographic challenge is managing its relations with the United States. Venezuela has, throughout history, used its relationship with the United States to attract the foreign investment and technological development that resulted in the country's well-developed oil sector. But relations between the two countries don't always match the economic reality. For example, Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez has built domestic and foreign policies around rejecting U.S. influence, despite continued close economic ties between the two countries.
Okay, so remember that was from 2012. All right, let's move on now. Hopefully that gives you some context for Venezuela there. But I want to move on to Venezuela's size and area as well as its population. So if we look at Venezuela today, a little over 352,000 square miles in area. When I say that, it just sounds like some random number though, right? I think it makes more sense to say how it compares maybe to some US states. And if you compare Venezuela in size to US states, it's approximately the same size as Texas and Utah combined. Okay. So that map shows you Texas overlaying Venezuela. Texas isn't quite as large as Venezuela.
Yeah.
So, and we all know how large Texas is. Okay. All right. It's the 33rd largest country in the world in terms of area. It's the 6th largest country in South America in terms of area. As of 2018, Venezuela had a population of about 31.7 million people. It's the 43rd most populous country in the world currently. Some of the largest cities in Venezuela include Caracas, which is the country's capital city. Maracaibo and Valencia are other major cities within the country. You can also see that Venezuela is quite a young country. The median population is only 28.7 years of age. Alright, so if you compare that to the US, for example, the median age in the US is a little over 38 years of age. Okay, so we're talking about a relatively young society overall when we're talking about Venezuela. By the way, the second map that you see here shows you where the population is. You can see in Venezuela's case, population is largely in the north towards the coast. All right, I have another true-false question here for you. Pico Bolivar is Venezuela's highest peak, reaching an elevation of approximately 5,000 feet. Is that true or false?
True.
True, okay. Did everybody pretty much agree about that?
I'm going with the Venezuelan.
Okay. Remember this for your classes, you know, and you have exams, true-false questions. Remember, the entire statement has to be true, right? And so part of this is true. Pico Bolivar is the highest point in Venezuela. That's accurate. It's just not 5,000 feet. It's quite a bit higher than that. It's about 5,000 meters, if you want to think of it in terms of meters, but it's over 16,000 feet. Okay, so correct answer is false in this case. Something really interesting, I think, as a side note here, is Venezuela actually still has a glacier within it, which surprises a lot of people given how close it is to the equator. If you ever want to see this glacier, I recommend trying to visit in the next 20 years because of climate change. The glacier is rapidly receding and it's expected to be fully receded within the next couple decades. Okay. By the way, the glacier, if you're looking for that in Venezuela, look for it on Pico Humboldt. Okay, that's the second highest peak in Venezuela. Okay, when we talk about Venezuela in terms of its physical environment, it's a country of great diversity. All right, I just mentioned there's a glacier to be found there. We also find many other unique environments here. Two of the defining features of South America touch parts of Venezuela. The Amazon, which so many people associate only with Brazil, okay, but the Amazon touches a number of other countries in South America, including Venezuela and the southern portions of the country. Okay, and then in the northwest of Venezuela, you also find a part of the Andes. It's actually the northernmost stretch of the Andes, which also touches many countries in South America. Okay? So we have two very distinctive environments in the Andes and the Amazon. You also find some highlands in the southeast, where Angel Falls is, the Guiana Highlands. We find in the southeastern corner of the country. And then we also find an environment known as the Llanos in Venezuela. Okay? These are like plains and savanna-like. They go right through the center of the country, essentially. There's also an extremely important river to be found in Venezuela known as the Orinoco. Okay, it's actually one of the most important rivers in all of South America. It's about 1,600 miles long, and it's drawn from a Guarana word that means a place to paddle. Okay, so Lake Maracaibo. You can see Lake Maracaibo pretty clearly on a map of Venezuela. It's actually not a lake, all right? It's technically a gulf because a lake is fully surrounded by land, and Lake Maracaibo actually has a little outlet into the Caribbean. I'm gonna go with the flow and call it a lake because everybody does, okay? But in Lake Maracaibo, you have a really unique set of conditions. You're in these warm tropical latitudes. You have these breezes that flow across the lake, and you also have the Andes nearby, okay? And those winds make their way up the slopes of the Andes. That presents an environment that is full of electrical charges, right? So you have these sometimes continuous thunderstorms in part of or near the southern end of Lake Maracaibo, okay, known as the Catatumba lightning. Really fascinating phenomenon. I want to show you a 2 or 3 minute video here that highlights this. There's no words in this, but it just shows you the majesty of nature in this part of the world. I hope you enjoy. savage state of nature. About 150 nights a year on average are treated to an amazing lightning show like this. Up to 20,000 flashes of lightning during the course of one evening. It can last up to 10 hours, these storms. If you were out last night, you may have seen in our own skies this spectacular lightning show. Imagine getting that 150 nights a year. It's sometimes called the Maracaibo Lighthouse, by the way, because it illuminates the sky so brightly in the region. Yes. Yes. Oh, you know, when I haven't been there to see it firsthand, but what I was reading, when I was reading about this phenomenon here, said that the lightning is often in a distance from the populated areas, so people can enjoy it, but don't have to worry so much about getting struck or getting the golf clubs out or anything. Yeah. So it's kind of the best of all worlds, actually. You get to enjoy the skies, but not have to worry about it too much. Okay, while we're talking about the physical geography of Venezuela, I want to mention a little something about the overall environment and the national park system. Venezuela has an extensive national park system, 43 national parks within the country, in fact, and these cumulatively cover 20% of Venezuela's territory. However, so first point here is Venezuela has a great tradition of environmental preservation and establishment of national parks throughout the country. Okay, so that's important to note. However, recent economic and political challenges facing the country have wreaked havoc, unfortunately, on the national park system and on the environment as a whole in Venezuela. Okay, there's been a lot in the way of illicit activities taking place, whether it's illegal mining, road building, deforestation, drug smuggling, taking place, you know, in some of these national park regions of the country. And you might notice also this zone that was established by President Maduro in 2016, the Arco Minero. This is a zone that covers 12% of the country, and that he said that it would be legal now to mine in that zone and so forth, okay? And some of this overlaps with some of the national park territories. So it's been said that the fate of the national park system in Venezuela is linked to the fate of the country as a whole. So there's some serious environmental challenges taking place right now, accompanying the political and economic challenges facing Venezuela. All right, ready for another question? All right, here's another true-false. Venezuela has had more Miss Universe winners than any other country in the world. You think I'm telling you the truth, or you think I'm full of it?
So the Colombia or Venezuela, one of them.
Oh, I'm hearing some truths, some falses on this one.
I'm going to go false.
I'm not being very nice today. It's false. Barely. Okay, so Venezuela has had 7 winners historically. That's such a close second only to the US, which has had 8. Okay? So it's almost true. All right? So 7 winners. The most recent winner so it's here in 2013, okay, from Venezuela. An interesting side note about that, Chile, fellow South American country, their Miss Chile, who participated in the Miss Universe last year, is originally Venezuelan. Okay, so there are actually kind of like 2 Miss Venezuelas in the pageant last year. All right. Okay, I'm going to try to cover about 15,000 years of history here in about 1 slide in 3 minutes. That's not fair to Venezuela, obviously. but I want to touch on a few far off highlights historically and a few more recent ones. Okay, so human habitation in this part of the world goes back a long way. Dates back about 15,000 years. Pre-European settlement here was defined largely by Carib, Arawak populations, and also Chifpa populations, who were defined largely by their linguistic commonalities. On Columbus's third voyage to the Americas, he landed in Venezuela in 1498. Then in 1499, another very famous figure in Venezuelan history, Alonso de Ojeda, landed along the shores of Lake Maracaibo, okay, 1499. And in fact, when he first landed on the shores of Lake Maracaibo, he noticed that there were some homes built on stilts that the indigenous populations had constructed. It reminded de Ojeda a little bit of Venice, and hence the name Venezuela, Little Venice.
Yeah.
You know that.
Okay, then moving forward, 16th century to 1821, Venezuela was under Spanish colonial rule. Simón Bolívar, very famous freedom fighter in South America, hails from Caracas originally. Okay, so the inspirational figure behind the freedom movement hails from what is today Venezuela. Then, for a short time period between 1821 and 1830, Venezuela was a part of a bigger country known as Gran Colombia. Okay, Gran Colombia included the modern-day countries of Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, right, and parts of Peru, right, and Venezuela. So, in fact, if you notice, I don't know if you noticed before, Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador's flags look very similar to one another, okay? It takes a bit of a flag expert to be able to determine between those three. It makes sense, though, when you look at the history here, why they might have some commonalities in the flag. All right, in the early 1900s is when oil was discovered in the Lake Maracaibo region. Oil has been a really defining element of Venezuela's economy pretty much ever since. By 1922, Venezuela was one of the world's leading producers of oil. And it is believed that Venezuela has the greatest reserves of oil of any country on the planet, even more than Saudi Arabia. All right. Then a real turning point in recent Venezuelan history occurred in 1998 when Hugo Chavez was elected into power. He remained in power until his death in 2013. And then the gentleman he appointed to be the next leader, Nicolas Maduro, is the current leader to this day. Not universally recognized, though, as Venezuela's president. There are two individuals currently who are recognized as Venezuela's president, depending on who you ask in what part of the world. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a couple minutes here. Okay. Take note of this. Just last year, very controversial elections in Venezuela. Very much disputed. The fairness of those elections was very much in question. Okay, but out of those elections, Maduro had emerged as the victor. Okay, here's another question. Ready? All right. This is also a true-false question. There's a tradition in Caracas for people to roller skate to Mass in the week leading up to Christmas. Do you think that's true or false?
I want that to be true.
No.
It's true. In parts of Caracas, there are people who roller skate to Mass the week leading up to Christmas. All right? And tradition has it that children, I'm getting backtracked here, that children tie a string around their big toe, they stick it out the window, and that these roller skaters who are commuting to Mass tug on the string on their way to Mass. Okay? So, oh good, okay. Good, I'm not an imposter after all. Okay, so, yes, so really interesting and unique tradition here.
It's the old country, not just Caracas.
Is it the,
Yeah.
in my research, I just saw it linked with Caracas. I don't know if it's the entire country. It is the entire country. Oh, great, okay.
Traditional.
Okay, so
So it is false.
X out. You're gonna be nitpicky like I've been. Yes, okay.
So what happens when they pull on the string? I
Too
mean, that's
hard?
gonna hurt. If they
Yeah, I don't know, yeah, brave kids. That's what I said. All right, if we look at the cultural portrait of Venezuela, we also find diversity in Venezuela's culture, okay? In ethnic terms, it's a confluence of European, African, Arab, and indigenous influences. Okay? The Spanish influence is very pronounced, but there are many different influences that feed into the mosaic of Venezuela. All right, linguistically, Spanish is the official language, the primary language spoken. Most of the population identifies as Catholic. How heavy practicing Catholic all the population is maybe a little bit different figure, but about 96% of the population is nominally Catholic, 2% of the population is Protestant, and 2% is other. Venezuela has one of the highest levels of urbanization in all of South America. 88% of the population lives in the cities of Venezuela. Okay? When Professor Miller-Waters speaks a little bit later, she's going to be telling you that much of the story actually takes place outside of the city, right? But many of Venezuela's residents today live in the cities of the country. All right, life expectancy of birth, 76.2 years of age. That's a little bit higher than the world average, by the way, which is around 72 years of age. Okay, so Venezuela has a relatively high life expectancy. Yes?
When was that done? Because I would think, from what I've seen in the news, life expectancy isn't as long as it.
It's going to be really interesting. This is actually from last year, I believe. So, that's a really good question, because I'd be curious what it was maybe 5 years ago versus where it is now. It could have been impacted, certainly, by recent events. But as of last year, 76.2 years of age is the average life expectancy. I just want to mention the flag here, okay? The flag has been a flashpoint of some controversy even in Venezuela because it has some political symbolism within it, okay? So the original flag of Venezuela, you notice yellow represents the riches of the country historically. Blue represents the waters of the Caribbean. Red represents the blood that was spilled in the fight for independence. Originally, there were 7 stars for Venezuela, kind of highlighting the early provinces of the country. In 2006, an 8th star was added, okay, for Guyana.
Oh!
Yes, which you can imagine how that did for relations between Guyana and Venezuela. But there's also recently added the coat of arms, okay, which was a bit of a political statement as well. All right. Speaking of politics, Venezuela's been in the news a little bit about this in recent years, right? Okay, so remember I was telling you, depending on who you ask and what part of the world you're asking this question, you might get a different answer. Who is Venezuela's president?
2.
Nicolas Maduro or Juan Guaido?
Why not? Why not?
Okay. Well, check out this map. It's really very interesting. The countries in blue, there's a little bit over 50 countries here in blue recognize Guaido as Venezuela's current president. Countries that are in red recognize Maduro as the current president of the country. Okay?
What is the red island? The bottom?
In where? In South America?
Between, the Africa and Australia. Like
Oh, that's South Africa.
So that's,
South Africa is the country.
oh, okay. Oh,
You
Yeah.
can't see Africa.
Yeah, most of Africa is,
yeah.
I don't know if they bypassed most of Africa in the pole or something, but yeah.
So there's only one South American country that recognizes.
Bolivia, yes.
Bolivia is the only country that
Bolivia is
recognizes.
the
Yeah,
only,
Bolivia, yeah.
yes. And if you're familiar with South America's political climate, you may know that Bolivia's leader and Venezuela's leader have some of the ideological
Leftist
commonalities. Yes, exactly.
President.
All right, if you're curious about Guaido, he was the president of the National Assembly, okay? And he stepped up earlier this year and said, hey, I'm the more legitimate president. Okay, so that's kind of where he emerged from. Okay, officially, Venezuela is a federal presidential republic, although we have seen in recent years it become more and more authoritarian. Today it has 23 states, the capital district that centers on Caracas, and a federal dependency which is linked with the islands in the north. The current constitution, notice when the current constitution was drafted, okay, a year after Chavez came into power. So, all right, so Nicolas Maduro and Juan Guaido, both recognized as president currently, depending on who you ask. Given the recent chaos that's been taking place in Venezuela, it has been described as a failing state. So what are some of the elements of a failing state? Well, first of all, the political turmoil that has been taking place here, devastated healthcare and education systems, lack of access to consumer goods. Venezuela has become a major cocaine trafficking hub in recent years, environmental degradation, and the largest refugee migration in a generation in South America has left Venezuela in recent years, okay? Making their way to many countries, both in the region and around the world. Okay, I want to show you a video that captures some of the recent political challenges and gives some context to the recent political challenges. This is about a 6 or 7 minute video. It gives you some additional background.
Siempre, siempre va a estar en las calles luchando por la libertad de mis hijos. Bueno. La violencia del gobierno y la violencia del AMPA. Todo eso son razones para tú salir a protestar, a manifestar, a defender tus derechos y aspirar a una mejor Venezuela.
Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America. It has the largest known oil reserves in the world, and its democratic government was once praised worldwide. But today, Venezuela's democratic institutions and its economy are in shambles. The country has the highest inflation rate in the world, making food and medicine inaccessible to most Venezuelans. Over the last 4 years, its GDP has fallen 35%, which is a sharper drop than the one seen during the Great Depression in the US, and the country's murder rate has surpassed that of the most dangerous cities in the world. These conditions have sparked months of protests against the president, Nicolas Maduro, and it's easy to see why. The country has become measurably worse since his election in 2013. A poll showed that about 80% of Venezuelans want Maduro removed from office. But instead, the opposite has happened. Maduro has consolidated his power, bringing the country closer to authoritarian rule. Maduro's political ambition became evident in December 2015. 2 years after he became president, a coalition of opposition parties called the Democratic Unity Roundtable, or MUD, won a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly, putting Maduro's rule at risk. In response, Maduro quickly forced out several Supreme Court justices and filled the positions with cronies loyal to him. In March 2016, the court ruled to strip the opposition-led National Assembly of its powers, a move that sparked massive protests across the country. The ruling was reversed a few days later, but the damage was done. Protests continued to grow and have left about 100 dead and thousands injured so far. Despite the violence and public outcry, Maduro held a vote in July to elect a new governing body called the National Constituent Assembly, which would have the power to rewrite Venezuela's constitution and essentially replace the National Assembly and leave virtually no opposition to Maduro's rule.
Bueno, el pueblo enfrente está del país. Bueno, una paz para todos.
With Maduro's recent vote, Venezuelans didn't have a say in whether the assembly should exist. They only had the option to elect its members. But when Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez, proposed a constitutional rewrite in 1999, he first called for a referendum to propose the election of the assembly. After most Venezuelans voted yes, they then elected a new National Constituent Assembly. See, unlike Maduro, Chavez was a charismatic and beloved leader. In the 90s, he burst onto television sets across the country. He blamed government corruption and Venezuela's elite for the economic inequality. His populist message resonated with the country's poor, who eventually helped bring him to power. The key moment in his presidency came in 2004, when oil prices surged. Venezuela's petroleum-dependent economy started booming, and Chavez went on to spend billions from the profits on social welfare programs for the poor. He subsidized food, improved the educational system, built an enviable healthcare system, and reduced poverty by more than half. These programs certainly helped the poor, but they served a purpose for Chavez as well. In order to be re-elected, he needed to keep these millions of poor Venezuelans happy. So he rigged the economy to do just that. He didn't scale back Venezuela's dependence on oil, and his unrestrained spending led to a growing deficit, which meant all these programs would be impossible to sustain if oil prices fell. After Chavez's death, when Maduro took office as his handpicked successor, that's exactly what happened. Oil prices plummeted in 2014, and Maduro failed to adjust. Hyperinflation has made medicines and food that were once subsidized unaffordable for Venezuelans poor, who now make up about 82% of the population. Like Chavez, Maduro has also rigged the economy to keep himself in power, but this time it's not benefiting the poor. He's exploited a complex currency system put in place by Chavez. Maduro set the official exchange rate at 10 bolivars per US dollar, but only his friends and allies have access to this rate. In reality, the Venezuelan currency has become basically worthless. Most Venezuelans get their dollars in the black market, where the rate is about 12,000 bolivars per dollar. The military, which got complete control of the food supply from Maduro in 2016, is reportedly profiting off this currency crisis. They import food at Maduro's special currency rate and sell it on the black market for a massive profit. So for military generals and political allies of Maduro, the crisis has offered a lucrative opportunity which has helped Maduro stay in power. He can't rely on that support alone. Which brings us back to Maduro's recent power grab. The opposition boycotted the vote, but Maduro held the vote for a new constitutional assembly anyway, and won a majority.
Protests on the streets of Venezuela turning deadly after President Nicolas Maduro declared victory.
Violence on Sunday, very real. The bomb went off near some motorcycle police, wounding several.
Election day clashes between protesters and police claiming at least 10 more lives.
At least one candidate has been murdered, shot to death. La elección de la Asamblea Nacional Constituyente es un fraude abierto, el mundo lo ve, lo ha visto. Está claro, todos están claros de lo que sucedió. Ahora, lo que hay que seguir es seguir buscando la libertad, porque nosotros vivimos en libertad y sabemos lo que es eso. Para allá vamos a ir. Lo que sucedió ayer fue el más grande fraude que se haya cometido en cualquier elección nacional. Era un fraude cantado, ya se sabía que iba a ser una elección con poca asistencia, pero con una gran participación forjada por el gobierno.
Maduro's government is trying to create the illusion of public support. The government claimed about 8 million people, or 40% of the country, voted, but experts put that number much lower, at just 3 million people. The international community, including Peru, Canada, Spain, Mexico, and Argentina, condemned the election. The The US imposed financial sanctions on Maduro and members of his government. But Maduro's assembly, filled with loyalists, convened anyway, and it swiftly removed Attorney General Luis Ortega, leader of the opposition. Armed groups reportedly arrested several other opposition leaders too. Whether the group will rewrite the Constitution or postpone the next presidential election remains to be seen. For now, Maduro has unprecedented power over a country that continues to spiral out of control.
Eso está cada día peor, Mateo. Si el número no se va, aquí Venezuela, bueno, ya. La guerra, la guerra. No creo que haya guerra, una guerra.
So as you can see, it's a very challenging situation right now, has been over the last several years. All right, if we shift over to the economy, remember, oil comes to the forefront once again, okay? It's estimated that about 95% of Venezuela's export income is derived from oil. So it's very dependent upon world oil markets, as that last video highlighted a bit there. So the recent economic crisis has been exacerbated by these falling oil prices, and the response of the government has been increase its control over the economy as a response. The labor force, you can see 71% of the country's population is engaged in the service industry, 22% in manufacturing. As of 2017, the unemployment rate in Venezuela was 27.1%. Remember, currently in the States right now, it's about 3 to 4%.
I think it's interesting just to point out that Venezuela and I think now Ecuador are the only two non-African nations or African continent nations to be in OPEC.
That isn't.
That's how that's how much they rely on oil and who they are connected to as far as their, what they are going to, whose lead they're going to take.
Right. No, that's interesting. Thanks for mentioning.
Yeah. Do you think oil is actually more of a curse for Venezuela than because?
I think that's another question. It depends on who you ask. Some have profited greatly from the oil wealth in Venezuela, and I'm sure those who have profited from it would give you a very different answer than a different segment of the population. So I again think it depends on the source you're asking in that case. So, all right. Another byproduct of this recent political and economic instability has been a tremendous outpouring from Venezuela to other countries in the region and the world. Okay, so there's been a massive outmigration in recent years. That's not the story of Venezuela, though, if you look at Venezuela as a whole. Venezuela was a country that historically attracted immigrants, okay? So this kind of bucks the historical trend, right? So historically, Venezuela was a country that had much more in-migration than out-migration. It was perceived as a country of opportunity and a very stable country, which made it very attractive to immigrants historically. This pretty much changed in the last 20 years, though. As the video highlighted, Chavez really championed the poor, especially, but at the same time, he marginalized much of the middle and upper class populations in Venezuela, right? Just symbolic of this, there was a strike in the oil industry in 2004, and Chavez's response was to fire everybody. 20,000 engineers and other workers in the oil industry were fired. What happened? A lot of those people who were fired left Venezuela looking for other opportunities. Very talented people that were in the industry. Okay, since 2014, as the country's economic and political crisis have worsened, over 4 million Venezuelans have immigrated. That's Remember, the entire population of the country is 31.7 million. That means more than 10% of the entire population of the country has left Venezuela in the last 5 years. Okay? Over 1 million Venezuelans have left Venezuela in the past year. Just since November of 2018, more than 1 million Venezuelans have left the country. Okay? To give you some figures of where Venezuelans are going, well, geographically, this makes a lot of sense. A lot of Venezuelans are going to Colombia. Okay, there are over 1.3 million Venezuelans who have made their way to Colombia in relatively recent times, followed by Peru. 768,000 Venezuelans have made their way to Peru. Around 300,000 have made their way here to the States. So we have as you may know, a large and vibrant Venezuelan community here in Houston, okay, which really enriches our community here. All right, net migration rate as of 2018, minus 1.2 migrants per 1,000 people, okay? It's one of the highest negative net migration rates in the world currently. So often when we talk about migration, we talk about it in abstract terms. It gets dehumanized so oftentimes. I just want to show you a little bit of a human element to the migration here with this next short video. It's about 3 minutes in length.
Every month, Veronica checks on this apartment. It's where her cousins used to live. Now all have emigrated. She preserves everything just as it once was. This small flavor, she says, is what families are for.
Tú sabes que la familia está para apoyar, porque siempre es lo que se necesita.
You know, feelings about helping one another in any way. When it comes to this, you have to do this. This doesn't come wrong. Family cover, family members cover, and that's how it is.
Es de los miembros que se miran y eso es lo que toca por ahora. No se toca nada.
But how does she feel, seeing this once lively home so empty?
Wow. It's so hard.
That overwhelming pain of separation shared by millions of Venezuelans. This is a city that is fast losing its residents, especially in once middle-class areas. And the population is getting older too. It is the retired that often stay behind. Jose looks after a condominium building. Here he is, advising a resident that water, once again, is being rationed. Maintaining an apartment block when so many of its owners have left is not easy.
Tenemos una inflación que en el orden de 1.350.000. We have inflation of more than 1 million%. Forecasts for 8 to 10 million% this year. You can imagine what that means for a building like ours, where most of the residents are retired.
But is there a chance that things might get better? Property owners here say that is unlikely.
In every meeting that we have with condominium owners in various Venezuelan cities, we see that we are in a very bad economic situation and things are going to get worse. There is no hope, no possibility on the horizon. As we can see, that suggests the situation is going to improve.
And what about Veronica's cousin? Might she ever come back? We contacted her via Skype.
Right now I'm in Miami, Florida. I start my new life. I have a job here. I have 2 kids, American kids. But my heart and my soul, they are always there in my home in Venezuela.
the story of millions of Venezuelans
We
currently.
have students here, I hear them all the time, their family homes are sitting empty, while their parents can't come here, so they're somewhere like Mexico or Colombia, but they've made it here. But, and they know that they'll never get the homes back, it's kind of like Cuba, because they'll be worthless, they can't sell them, whatever, they'll never get them back. But we have a lot of students that that's their story.
Tough situation.
Is my spot?
Yes, very difficult. So let's move on to trivia to take our minds off the challenges right now for a moment, okay? And this one might be a little tricky too, okay? Let's see how you do with this one. The most popular sport in Venezuela is football. I mean, we call it soccer in the US, but almost everywhere else you go in the world, they call it football. Is that true or false?
False.
True.
Ooh, okay, I'm getting mixed responses. Some of those responses are with conviction. Okay, let's see how this shakes out.
Baseball.
It is baseball. It is false. Okay. Yes, most popular sport in Venezuela is baseball. You know, football's popular, okay, but it doesn't hold a candle to the baseball. In 2000, this year, there's 68 Venezuelan players on active Major League Baseball rosters, including one beloved one here in Houston, right? The Astros, by the way, have 3 Venezuelans on our team, okay? So not only do we have Jose Altuve, but we have Robinson Chirinos, okay, who I believe is a catcher for the team. And then we also have Hector Rondon, all right, who's another pitcher for the Astros. But since 1938, there have been at least 350 Venezuelans playing in the majors. Really impressive. Today, Venezuela has the second highest international baseball presence in the majors. Anybody know who's number 1? Some of you may already know.
International presence? International?
Yeah, international. Venezuela is number 2.
It's either Dominican or Puerto Rico.
What about
Yes.
Cuba?
Cuba's a good guess. It is the Dominican Republic. Is number 1. Nicely done. Yeah. Okay. Now, I want to show you one last video here highlighting Venezuela. Yesterday, this didn't work so well, so hopefully I'm going to get it to play either on here or via YouTube directly. This video really captures Venezuela's diversity and its beauty, all right? Mind you, when it was produced by the Venezuelan Embassy to Canada back in 2015, which may explain the mural you see at the end of the video, okay? But what you see, really Venezuela's beauty highlighted here. So hopefully this will work for us. Oh, this is what happened yesterday. Okay, let's see. So we can go to plan B here. If not, and by the way, I want to mention this because my apologies for the sound quality for the videos today and bearing through that. These videos, if you did sign in today and signed in to be on that Canvas page, these links for these videos, if you want to check them out and have better access to the sound and access to this period, if we aren't able to access this, they'll all be up on the Canvas page within the next couple weeks. Okay? So keep that in mind, please. But anybody know easy way to just jump out of this?
Can you click on the link on the bottom?
See, well, my screen. Oh, good. Okay, I think this might work here. You're seeing what I'm seeing. Good. Okay, so I think this will work for us. Okay. Okay.
you know of any other country that shows such a diversity of natural sites? This country is Venezuela. The Caribbean seashores opened the door for more than 900,000 kilometers of a country blessed by huge touristical potential.
Is that it? That's
Venezuela invites you all to meet its wonderful sights. Meet Venezuela, meet beautiful beaches, islands, golden sea lions, and white sands along with the intense blue of its seas. It gives you a surrounding experience of paradise environment, full of fun under the Caribbean sun. Meet Venezuela. Meet magical mountains. From their highest points, Venezuela waits for you to meet their wonderful and amazing mountains. Hundreds of kilometers surrounded by valleys, ridges, creeks, and rocky formations where you will experience nice low temperatures from the most imponent heights of the country. Meet Venezuela. Meet the countryside. Representing almost a third part of the country, this region shows history, tradition, and the most extent variety of unique species in the world. From dusk until dawn, the countryside offers every day the best sights, along with walks and many adventures. Meet Venezuela. Meet enigmatic jungles. Hidden in a magical place, the Venezuelan jungle, with an astonishing natural display of 430,000 square meters, shows the world the majestuosity of its sights. Powerful rivers, a great number of waterfalls, and a huge variety of natural resources and waterfalls present a place full of energy and mysticism. Meet Venezuela. Meet its roots. Indigenous ethnies are living testimony of the history of this land that keeps its own identity, living a legacy of unity of this ancient place. Meet Venezuela. Meet wonderful people. Happy and kind people, full of history, culture, faith, and traditions. Expressing livelihood through its music and the colorful life of this great nation. A country where dreams are reborn. Come and enjoy its beaches, mountains, jungles, countryside, desert, and their people, because Venezuela is a country to meet and to love. Meet Venezuela, where dreams are reborn.
So I hope that video gives you a little bit of insight on sheer beauty and diversity of Venezuela. Just a couple closing thoughts here, that is, Venezuela, as we can see, faces some immense challenges. There's been a tremendous amount of suffering, sadly, in recent times for Venezuela. But that said, Venezuela is an amazingly diverse and beautiful country. The people of Venezuela also reflect the beauty of the country and the soul that is Venezuela. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your attention and your questions throughout and your fact checking too. And I'd like to now pass this on to Professor Waters. Thank you.
So the book that is associated with the country we're studying this semester is called Black Sugar, and it's by an author, Miguel Bonnefoy. I want to start by telling you a little bit about Miguel Bonnefoy. He was born in 1986. So for some of you, that seems normal. For some of us, this isn't. He's an incredibly young author, right? His mother is Venezuelan, and his father is from Chile, and he was born in France. And so often right? I mean, it's the coolest thing about our global culture, right? So he writes in French, which is really interesting. And I want to read you, a lot of his interviews are in French. Sadly, I am so deficient in French, so I had to search around and find one that had been translated into English. But in one of his interviews, he explains how he got started, and I wanted you to hear the story. For those of us who are English professors, we love writer origin stories. We can't get enough of them. And so this is what he says. He says, the day I finished my degree in modern literature at the Sorbonne in May of 2010, I was called before a board of examiners to present my dissertation on the engaged literature of the interwar period. After I had spoken for 3 hours, I was awarded my master's. I went off to celebrate with friends from the Sorbonne. The Sorbonne is a super fancy school in France. But instead of partying, we ended up discussing the placement of commas in the work of Proust. Right? That was the moment I realized how removed I had become from the real world. It dawned on me that I had spent 5 years of my life in a Parisian intellectual literary bubble, totally detached from the notion of political engagement I had argued for in my dissertation. I was suddenly seized with an urgent, almost physical need to go back to my country, Venezuela. Back in Caracas, I became a French teacher at the Alliance Francaise while also doing marketing for cultural events for the City Hall and Plaza Boulevard. Leading this double life meant that I could maintain my links with France while contributing to the art world in Venezuela. I was coming out of my lessons one day when I saw a poster inviting young writers from around the world to enter a contest. So he sends off one of his short stories, it's called Icarus, to this contest. And there are writers from all over the world who enter this contest, and he wins. So he wins the prize. It's called the Prix des Jeunes Écrivains, and it's a prize for a short piece of work. He goes to France to select his award, and while he's there, he's approached by an agent who says, I really love your short story. Do you have a novel? Because I'd like to represent you. And he flat out lies. He goes, yeah, I totally have a novel. I can get it to you in a few months. And so instead of heading back to Venezuela, he takes a job as a hotel porter, which is basically, that means that he kind of oversees all of the things that happen overnight at a hotel, so that when things got real quiet around 3 a.m., he could write his novel. So about a year later, he does that for a year. He works at the hotel and he's writing his novel. He finds the agent again and he goes, here it is. And it's called Octavio's Journey. She publishes it, they love it, it wins awards. It wins an award for best debut novel, and he wins an award for best new writer, right? So he's off on his amazing journey. This is his second novel, which was also written in French, which means that for us to be able to read it, a really good translator has to come around and translate it. Many of you are multilingual. You speak and read and write more than one language, right? And so you know when you're going back and forth between languages that it's a pretty difficult thing to translate accurately, especially if you're translating a work of art, right? Because the way the sentence and the descriptions and the words would be laid out in French, that's really different than the way it's going to look in Spanish. And it's way different than it's going to look in English. So you have to have a translator who's almost an artist as well, who can take the way and the implications and the subtext as the way that it's written in French, translate that into English so it's still a beautiful work of art. The woman who did that, her name is Emily Boyce, and she studied French and Italian at the University of Oxford, which is a really fancy school in England, right? And so she started working in translation just kind of on the side. She worked for the BBC, and then she got hired up by the publishing company that publishes his work as their translator from French to English. So that's what she's doing now. So in many ways, this book is an exemplar of the really cool things that come from our globalization and the migration and the way that the cultures kind of mix. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears for a second. Yes?
Do you know why was he raised in France? I mean, why did they a Chilean and Venezuelan parents?
I don't know his family history yet. I bet that somebody who reads French would get more from the interviews. But what often happens, and you're quite right, what often happens when a writer is multilingual is they make intentional decisions about why they write in the language that they do. Yeah.
I'm curious why he wrote it in French and not Spanish, because I mean, his history is Spanish.
Well, and the only thing I can do is speculate, right? If French is his first language, that might be the language that he feels most artistic in. Sometimes writers who are multilingual will write in a language of the Western culture in order to make a point with those people. I don't know that that's what he's doing, right? We would have to research that and it would be really cool.
Just ask him.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't understand Spanish?
Yeah.
My question really goes to his parents who were both Spanish speakers. So they made a really odd kind of choice to raise him speaking French. That wasn't their home language. So it's just interesting. I'm gonna look into this.
So Google while we're doing this, and then you can.
He was born in France.
Huh?
He was born.
Yeah, he was born in France.
Yeah, he was born in France.
Yeah.
But his parents were not.
Right.
They had migrated. They were over there. I don't know why they were over there. I don't know if they were diplomats or what their world was. But you find out the answer. When you find it, let us know. So I want to ask you some unrelated questions before I jump into talking a little bit about the book. Y'all have heard of fables, right? Fables are short stories that are meant to teach a lesson, or they often have a moral. Many times, the main characters in a fable are animals, right? So like one of my favorites is the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah.
Yeah? Do y'all have fables that you heard from your childhood?
Oh yeah.
What's your favorite?
The scorpion and I can't remember if it's a dog or the one that basically about the scorpion crossing the river on the back of another animal.
Yeah.
They're saying how, and the animal says, well, you'll sting me and we'll drown. And the scorpion says, no, I won't sting you because I will die as well. And then they're halfway across the river and the scorpion stings them. And just before they both drown, obviously asked, why did you sting me? We're both going to die. And Scorpion says, it's just my nature.
It's my nature.
I think it's an old Indian,
American
Indian.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. So you know the kind of thing I'm talking about, those kind of stories? No? Okay.
His father was a diplomat.
Thank you.
That's why they're in France.
Okay, thank you. How about a legend? Legends are stories that are passed down from generation to generation that usually have a historical sort of fact in the background, right? One really popular legend for certain cultures is the legend of King Arthur, right? Pulled the sword out of the stone, was first, right? All that. Any legends that pop into your head besides Altuve?
Robin Hood.
Robin Hood, there's a good one. Any other legends?
Legend of Sleepy Hollow.
Thank you, thank you.
It's easy if it has the word in it.
Yes, right. Okay, fables, legends. Here's another one. Magical realism. Magical realism. It's, Aladdin? Perfect! Magical realism is a movement in fiction.
Yeah.
And it was really born in Latin America. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is sort of the premier writer of magical realism. And magical realism, it takes the modern world, the real modern world, and infuses it with magical elements, right? And treats those magical elements as if they're both possible and real and can happen. Gabriel Garcia Marquez has this really great short story called A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. And it's about this man who shows up in this town, and he seems to be kind of bedraggled, he's not doing very well, seems kind of sick, he's got these huge wings, and he might be molting, right? And the town doesn't really know what to do with him. And so they kind of cage him up, and they try to make him well, and they can't figure out what he wants to eat. And you know, some are speculating, is he an angel? I don't know. But never once does anybody say, wait, people shouldn't have wings, right? It's just taken as this is what has happened. There's another writer, his name is Franz Kafka, and he comes from a whole different part of the world. But he wrote a pretty famous short story called The Metamorphosis. And the first line of that story is, Gregor Samsa woke up one morning and he was a beetle, right? And so the whole story is, so the first thing he has to do is like, okay, so I'm lying on my back, you know, it's got all of his little beetle arms and he can't flip over and he's just trying to get to work. And there's not though, wait, this is impossible. People don't become beetles, right? It's more, how am I going to get to work if I can't flip over? So that's kind of the way magical realism kind of works. So we have a story here that's been described as fable, as a legend, and as an example of magical realism. It's also a treasure hunt. From the very beginning, the story is a treasure hunt. So let me ask you again. Any stories that you can think of that was about a hunt for treasure? Yes, Treasure Island. So what happens when there's a treasure hunt? What kind of things happen in a story that's about a treasure hunt?
Well, you always have a good side and a bad side, and basically the mystery is to find the map, and you know the whole plot line is normally who gets there first.
Right, it's a race. There's maps and clues. You're trying to get there first. There's something that's worthwhile at the end of it. There are usually villains and good people who are after the treasure. And so this is also a treasure hunt, a big one. Now, we English folks look at these things in kind of a unique way. A few semesters back, we did a book that was about chefs and making food for a family, and they had recipes. And then, a few semesters back, we also did a book that was a detective novel, right? There was a mystery, and there was a detective trying to solve the mystery. And here we have a treasure hunt. For we English folks, often these become ways to think about how we read and how people write fiction, right? You can easily think of writing a book in the same kind of terms that you would think of making a really good meal, right? What kind of ingredients do you put in? How long do you cook it? What do you leave out? How many will it serve? You can see how it can easily become a metaphor for writing sometimes for reading. Detectives, what a way to think about reading, right? You're a detector. You're going to figure out, you're going to look for clues in that novel so that you can figure out the mystery, whether it's the mystery of a theme or whether it's a mystery of what else it's trying to tell us about various parts of the world. I love to think of reading as going on a treasure hunt, right? Where you're looking for clues and you're looking for the treasure, whatever that is for you, at the end of a novel. So there are ways to think about this book as a legend about legends or as a fable about fables. It's certainly an example of magical realism, but we readers get to go on a treasure hunt. This really great review by Necessary Fiction describes the book this way. Black Sugar is best described as an exemplar of magical realism, told so confidently that could almost be true. With his second novel, Bonnefoy has mythologized the creation of Captain Morgan, Rum, spinning a tall tale that also encompasses 3 generations of a family's history and the industrialization of Venezuela. While those are broad demands, Bonnefoy keeps the narrative tightly focused on his characters, and the novel neither rushes nor drags. Instead, the story is told as though it's a village legend, and the reader is being let in on a secret. Bonnefoy jumps in time and plays the voice of God on more than one occasion, underscoring the idea that this is a narration. His language is descriptive, begging to be read out loud. For English readers, the beauty of the words is not lost in Emily Boyce's translation, right? So it's letting us know that this is just as pretty in English as it was in French. And indeed, this is a novel that's going to jump around for you. The first chapter starts with a pirate ship getting wrecked, right? And so you get to sort of go with that and figure out what has happened to Captain Morgan. Have y'all heard of Captain Morgan? No. You don't have to answer.
I'm also drinking.
That's right. So it's about that ship getting moored. The next chapter jumps 300 years to the family that owns the land that may or may not be on top of where this treasure has been lost to time, right? And that's the rest of the novel. The rest of the novel, we get to follow 3 generations of this family. And they're very interesting. The men, the women, they're really interesting. They play different roles. And you'll get to look at how they conceive of the world, how they think of their relationships with each other. And it's really interesting. The thing that is cool about this novel is that it sets all of these little Easter eggs around, and then at the end brings them all together in really surprising ways. So some of the reviewers, and people have loved it. The Irish Times loved it. The Portland Book Review has loved it. It's got this sort of wide-ranging appreciation for it. Lots of different kinds of people like it. But all of them said that at the end of it, they immediately started reading it again so they could go back and catch up on all of the things that were buried in the text that they wanted to see how it led to that conclusion. This same reviewer notes that it's an interesting time for the people of Venezuela, right? Wherever they are, whether they're there, whether they've migrated to other places. And here's what this reviewer says. Black Sugar comes out at a time when Venezuela is in the news for violence and turmoil. But Bonnefoy's prose bursts with a pride for the region and its people, particularly the farms and farmers. At the same time, he acknowledges the colonizing forces that fomented unrest, whose influence is felt today as the country destabilizes. It's an important book to read right now, for even though it's fantastical fiction, it gives the reader the context for the next headlines. I really think you're going to love this book. I really think you are. Now, if you decide to participate in the scholarship opportunity this semester, there are 2 things that you do, right? You do a written portion and you do a presentation portion. The written portion is a reflection And it's a reflective essay that asks you to talk about and write about your reactions specifically to the novel, right? In our online materials, we've given you a list of questions, and they're meant to spur your thoughts. They're meant to say, oh, yeah, I want to talk about this particular character and what this character means to me, or how it connects to my experiences, or I want to talk about this particular moment, or I want to talk about this thing that surprised me the most. It really is your response, your reaction, your ideas about this novel. If you decide that you want to do that, that is awesome. On our site, there are going to be a whole list of professors who are involved in this event, right? And so if you want to get feedback, if you want to brainstorm, if you want to test out ideas on any of the things that you have with this, just contact one of the professors, and any of us will be happy to work with you, okay? I really think you're going to love this book. It spans a long time. It covers a lot of scope, and look at that, right? He does it really, really streamlined, and I think you're going to love it. I think you're really going to love it.
Can I just say something about an old English lit major?
Yes.
And having been born in Maracaibo, Venezuela, and being Mexican American, I think the thing about I can't wait to read this book. But magical realism for me is something that has always been just it is just special to Central and Latin America. And we find a delight in it, like Hopkins is never gave me.
Right. He totally tried.
He tried, but I think it's going to be really interesting to hear from if we can get more Venezuelan students to hear how they react to that magical realism that comes from the Venezuelan culture, and just everything that is Venezuela from all of the hundreds of years that have gone into making it. Because it really it shows, like water for chocolate or whatever.
Yeah.
It shows something that is just so special to that place.
Exactly.
And that's what's going to be fun.
Exactly. I mean, Gabriel Garcia Marquez said that magical realism, one of the things that it does is it forces us to question, well, what do you mean by real, right? And he also points out that what cultures count as real changes, right? Mm-hmm. It's different from culture to culture, right?
Well, and also, you said it's time to read it for Venezuela. I would say it's time to read it for the United States.
Oh, heck yeah.
Because what's real? Because I'm half and half, and so it's like half of me, my family's like, so what? Like, no problem. That's fine. There's a two-headed monster or whatever. And then the white Anglo-Saxon Puritan one is like, no, it's gotta be this way. And we're getting that all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Katy too, and it's a little Venezuela out there,
Can you talk about the
Venezuela? Yeah, exactly. And so we need to understand those. Yeah, it changes. It's different.
It does change, and it does, and have you ever had a dream that's so real that when you wake up, it stays with you, right? Yeah. That dream was also a real thing that happened to you, right? And so I particularly love magical realism. I'm so glad that you brought up about the population in Katy that are Venezuelan. On September the 27th, we were going to have a community event at our Katy campus. It starts at 3 and it goes to 7. And we're going to have a Venezuelan food truck. We're going to have some Venezuelan music. Everybody's a live band. There we go. Tell us about it, Cindy. No, okay. Okay. We're going to have a band. We're going to have salsa lessons. We're going to have a food truck. We're going to have some games. And we hope that everybody will come. It's meant to be community fun, and there'll be food.
Free food for the first 100
Free food. September the 27th, which is Friday. Yeah, which is Friday, and it'll go from 3 to 7, and you can come anytime during that time period, right? Anytime that works for you.
And we need the word to go out to our Venezuelan students so that they'll come. And it's a way of of introducing where you are from to us and a better understanding, and just a lot of good, exchange of cultural information.
And then, can I also say that next Thursday at Spring Branch at 12:30, there will be a professor from the University of Houston Law Center. He's Venezuelan and he's going to talk about the current situation. He's really a petroleum lawyer, but it'll be interesting to hear what he has to say. His credentials are pages long and he's young and super impressive. So don't miss that. And if you have friends who want to hear this wonderful presentation that didn't come today, these two super special professors will be repeating it tomorrow at Spring Branch.
That's right.
So share that with anybody you know that might be interested.
And even more so, we are incredibly brave and agreed to be recorded. So it's going to be posted so that if you have friends who can't make any of the events, they can watch, and that counts as participation, right? And they can jump in and read the book with us and then participate in that way as well.
Yes. And we asked them to sign up, and so we'll be giving them, if they sign up, we'll be giving the information. And the link to the website is on here too.
And next Tuesday, the 17th, at the Rice Media Center, there is the
Yes.
Venezuelan human rights attorney
Yes.
who is speaking and showing film.
Correct.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, so
Part of the World Affairs Council presentation.
Where could we find more information on that?
that's on the library reading this webpage.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Reading culture webpage, I'm sorry.
So look at the library, the link is down here, and you come on and get stuff at the library. Okay.
And that totally counts as an event.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
And so does the Venezuelan Culture Night.
Yeah. So yeah, y'all done this one, you do one more, you're good to go. Of course, we hope that you'll come to all the rest of the events too.